members, it's the appointed time and we have a quorum. Let's call the meeting to order. Today, we will be meeting 49 deputations and individuals, and the list has been listed in Appendix 1. And 5 deputations individuals have given their written submissions and they said that they would not come. There will be 2 sessions today. The first session will run from 9:05 to 10:30, and 26 deputations and individuals will give their views in that session. And then we will have a break for 10 minutes. And for the second session, it will be from 10:40 a.m. to 12:25 p.m. and then a total of 23 deputations and individuals will give their views. And in a minute, I will first ask the administration to brief us, and then followed by deputations and individuals who will speak in the prescribed order. And I'll see whether I'll ask the administration to give a consolidated reply before we ask members to raise questions. So first of all, let's invite the administration team and deputations and individuals to join us first. Welcome, the administration team, deputations and individuals for attending today's meeting. And for those of you present, if needed, you can put on your earpiece and you can choose your language on the screen. 1 is Cantonese, 2 is English, and 3 is Putonghua. And please note the various security measures listed in the notes for attending meetings in conference rooms and public observing meetings in the public galleries. And those in the public gallery can also get a copy from our security staff at the public gallery. I'd like to remind deputations here, if you make our representation to the panel, you will not enjoy the protection and exemption under the Electoral Powers and Privileges Ordinance, and that is the CAP 382, and your written submissions will not be protected or exempted under the same ordinance. Because there are so many deputations and individuals attending, and because of the constraint in time, I will give you no more than 3 minutes to speak. So please be succinct in your speech. Whenever the bell rings, it means that you have to stop speaking. So first of all, I'd like to ask the administration to do a briefing. No need to do so. All right. Okay, then. Well, we will now ask the deputations to give their views. Some of the deputations are not here yet. And the first one is Taxi Owners Association, Mr. Wang Po-Kang. Mr. Wang. Good morning, Mr. Frankie Yik and members. Good morning. I'm from the Taxi Owners Association. I'm the chairman, Wang Po-Kang. Because of the road traffic condition in Hong Kong has been deteriorating, and there is rampant illegal parking, so the government is proposing increasing the fixed penalty charges, but the government should not pass on the responsibility of tackling the problem to the professional drivers in commercial vehicles. Our association believes that is because the Transport Department has not been managing the traffic properly, and hence we are seeing the problem. We ask that more parking spaces be provided, and also especially those in the busy areas. And you should send more law enforcement officers to do enforcement instead. And you should not be increasing the fixed penalty charges and put a heavier burden to professional drivers. The two roadsides are often illegally parked, and taxis have to drop off their passengers in the middle of the road, and they're caught inadvertently by the law all the time. And there is illegal parking because of insufficient parking spaces. Say taxis, for example, we are on two shifts. The ones on the night shift will end their shift around 2 and 3 a.m. And if they are parking on the roadside and not causing nuisance to road users, I hope that the police can exercise discretion in handling that. We hope that the Transport Department can provide sufficient on-street nighttime parking for taxi drivers. Now, for the morning shift, taxi drivers, they will start working around 6 to 7 a.m. and we are not causing nuisance to other road users. If you are increasing fixed penalty charges, you will only put a heavier burden on professional drivers. So I hope that the electrical members can consider the livelihood of the professional drivers. Thank you, Mr. Wong. The next one is from Taiwan Motor, Mr. Hoi Shan. Good morning, members. We object to the government taking cross-the-board approach and increasing fixed penalty charges. Under the government's present policy, it is now reducing the number of parking spaces, but at the same time, you're increasing the fixed penalty charges. You're posing a heavier burden to professional drivers. We agree that double parking, triple parking should be curbed. And when a penalty for those who are using metered parking without paying should be increased. And sometimes the cars are parked there for one whole day or even one whole week, and that will cause more congestion problems because those who need the cars parking spaces don't use them, and as a result they have to park illegally. So the government should consider not taking the cross-the-board approach in increasing the penalty charges, but they should adopt a more targeted approach. So try that out for 1 to 2 years to see if the problem can be resolved first. All right. Well, we have more deputations today. The next one is Mr. Chung Chi-ming from the Labour Party. The traffic congestion here is very serious, and there is illegal parking, rampant illegal property. The responsibility lies not only on the drivers and owners, but rather the government has to bear responsibility. There is a great difference in the fees among the 3 cross-harbour tunnels, and there is redevelopments in urban cities and urban areas, and we are counting only on private developers to provide parking spaces. Metered parking along the roadside takes up only 3% of all parking spaces in Hong Kong, and the number is going down even. And the same goes for public car parks. In 2014, the Middle Road car park in Chimchurcho was demolished, and in May this year, the Murray Road car park in the Central has been closed down and will be demolished. And in the future, the government plans to shut down the Shangwang and Yau Ma Tei public car park, the one in Rumsey Street as well. Private car parks charge high parking fees, and they take up over 90% of all parking spaces in Hong Kong. And they are charging 30% more than public car parks in the same area. And private cars are increasing in number over the years, and the government hasn't drawn up policies to curb the growth of private cars. So these are the causes for road congestion and illegal parking. And in busy streets and districts, congestion and illegal parking are rampant, and there are 2 main reasons. One, the public buses are running on overlapping routes, and a large number of buses are traveling on the same road and picking up and dropping off passengers at the same routes. And in these busy districts, there are what we call the buses cars as well. They are often parked along the roadside waiting, and the drivers are waiting for the buses to very often these vehicles come with the drivers, and whenever there is law enforcement, then the drivers can drive away. When the police officers are spotted leaving the area, then they will come back to the same locations. So in the past couple of years, the police have been doing vigorous law enforcement and issuing fixed penalty tickets. However, this has not been effective in controlling the illegal parking in busy districts. Conversely, there is even more congestion, and indirectly, and they are helping the administration to shirk their responsibility. Well, your time's up, Mr. Song. I hope that you can make the best use of the 3 minutes. The next one is Mr. Lee Ka-kay. The Buses Association. That's from the Public Omnibus Operators Association, object to increasing the fixed penalty charges. When we're talking about commercial vehicles, not just public buses, we are facing a great problem. The space is limited. There is a lack of car parking spaces. There is little space for maintenance. It's difficult to recruit drivers as well. These are common problems known to all. Hong Kong is a knowledge-based society, and we face problems in recruiting drivers, especially for trades which have long working hours. Say, for example, for bus drivers, or public bus drivers, they may have to start work at around 6 a.m. when they have to take the students to schools, and they stop work, get off work at around 6 p.m. So the working hours from 6 a.m. to 7 or 8 p.m., and then they have to find a place to park the cars. Of course, in the interim, they can get some rest as well, but the working hours are that they would have to work till into the evening before they can get home. So where can they park their buses? At the end of 2015, the public buses parking spaces total 5,000. Franchise and non-franchise buses are parking spaces 14,000 to 15,000 parking spaces. Park vehicles. So we are running short of 2/3 of parking spaces. Where are they parking then?
For franchise buses, they have ample facilities for parking. But what about franchise buses? Where can we park? Apart from narrow alleys and streets in industrial areas, we have to rely on the government's parking spaces. But the meters will only last till 12 midnight. So if drivers have to rest till 7 or 8, do they have to wait till about 10 p.m.? And of course, they need more rest because they have to get up at 6 a.m. the next day. Apart from a lack of resources and parking spaces, the government or transport department, well, for the metered spaces during holidays and at nighttime, the government should adjust the metering time. You shouldn't require metering till 12 midnight. So I hope the chairman can reflect that to the government. Okay, thank you very much. From the Kowloon Heavy Vehicles Association, Mr. Leung Kan-kyun. Thank you. Good morning. The government is raising the penalties. This is a ridiculous decision. Hong Kong has always been congested, and we lack parking spaces over the past 10 years or so. The growth in number of vehicles has been rapid, especially for small vehicles or private cars. And with a prosperous construction trade, we have a lot of tractors, and for metered parking spaces for trucks. The Transport Department relied on legislation from the 1960s in the UK. I understand that the Commissioner for Transport is here. And for medium trucks, the maximum length is 11 meters, but the parking spaces are only 10 meters long. So how can they be parked? We have 15,000 tractors and trucks, and Hong Kong doesn't even have one parking space for trucks. And the Transport Department said that there's a space in Sha Tin for license examination purpose. Metered spaces can only increase your revenue, but it would not ease congestion. I hope the police or TD can pay attention to that. In Castle Peak Road in Sham Shui Po, there are 4 lanes, and only 1 lane is in operation every day because on both sides of the road there are cars, and some buses would have to be berthed there as well. And sometimes buses would even block the 3rd lane. Enforcement action over the past 10 years have been slack. In the past, in restricted areas, trucks can only dislodge after 10 p.m. And nowadays, people would dislodge their goods at around 8 p.m. So enforcement is an issue. Your time's up. And Mr. Wong Wing Huang from the Hong Kong Public Light Bus Owner and Driver Association. I'm against the government raising the fixed penalty for offences. The livelihood of minibus drivers is very difficult recently, and they can make just enough to make ends meet. With the competition from the MTR and buses, and that there are lots of restricted zones for red minibuses, and the provision of parking spaces is also highly lacking. And this has led to offences from drivers. And with the commissioning of the Kwun Tong Extension and South Island Line of the MTR, the business of minibus drivers were further affected, and there's a lack of parking spaces. Drivers cannot pay the fixed penalties, and their business is affected. We request the government to introduce more 24-hour parking spaces for minibuses. And they should allow drivers to go to the toilet or take a break. A lot of drivers don't even want to drink water, and this affects their health. And they suffer hypertension, diabetes, etc. They should open up more restricted zones and introduce electronic road pricing at busy areas in order to ease congestion. and encourage the public to take public transport. This way, road congestion can be eased. Again, we are against the government raising the fixed penalty for offences. Thank you. Thank you. Next, the Hong Kong Guangdong Drivers Association, Mr. Zhong Wing. Good morning. We are against the government raising fixed penalty. The reason is this would not ease road congestion. The real problem is that we have so little roads and we lack parking spaces. A lot of Hong Kong Guangdong drivers operate commercial vehicles, including trucks and container vehicles. So how many parking spaces do we have for container vehicles? We have very few, and the same goes for trucks. Another deputation said, as he has said, the roads are full of cars, the lanes are full of cars, and there's no space for us to disembark. Raising the fixed penalty would only increase the burden of professional drivers and will do nothing to ease congestion. And in the Hong Kong Guangdong transport trade, the business environment is already very challenging. And in our heyday, we have 30,000 to 40,000 vehicles per day, and these days we only have a few thousand. Given the difficult circumstances, if the government is to raise the fixed penalty, well, this is not the this will not solve the problem at all. The Transport Department and police should be fair and look at the provision of parking spaces and how they could be properly planned. This way, trucks would not be illegally parked everywhere, and this is the solution to congestion. Thank you very much. From the Container Trade Terminal Association, Container Transport Association, Mr. Chen Tek Sao. The government is raising the fixed penalty, and they are implementing the recommendation in December 2014 from the Transport Advisory Committee. We feel that raising the fixed penalty is not the solution to easing congestion. On the other hand, this would lead to more conflicts between the public and police. The fact is we lack parking spaces. Some of our operators are a one-man company, and the government was stepping up enforcement, and now they are trying to raise penalties. You are trying to stir up more conflicts. Illegal parking is due to a mismatch in the number of vehicles to the number of parking spaces. The government should come up with ways to contain the growth of vehicles. They should, well, increasing penalty and stepping up enforcement are not the real solution. We have seen increased enforcement, and they have made more prosecutions to provide more in order to ratify their proposal, but they have not done anything with parking spaces. In the report I mentioned in Schedule 2, factors for illegal for congestion, including illegal parking and embarkation and disembarkation, and there are too many road projects and no recommendations have been put forth. As you know, commercial vehicles are for professional purposes, and we had 817,000 registered vehicles, and 70% were private vehicles, or 580,000. Has the government established any policy to control such growth? I hope the government can understand the plight of frontline drivers, and they should draw up viable short, medium to long-term solutions. And when the government conducts land planning in the future, they should consider the ratio of vehicles embarking and disembarking. Next, from the Chunwan Coaches Association, Mr. Tang Chi-kung. Chairman, members, the government proposes raising fixed penalty for illegal parking. We are strongly against the proposal. Over the years, for commercial vehicles, as other deputations have said, there have not been any growth. The growth only lies in private cars and vans. We have had 7,000 franchise buses over the years, and 18,000 taxis, 4,3500 minibuses. And the number of trucks have only gone down. And the number of school buses increased from about 800 to 2,000. However, they have nowhere to be parked. And there are no legit parking spaces for these school service buses. Over the years, the government has ignored the situation in Hong Ham, Hong Man Tin, and in East Kowloon. And the number of parking spaces has gone down by almost 3,000, including the car parks in Fat Kwong Street have gone, and from Wong Tai Sin to Yau Tong, there are no outdoor commercial parking spaces. At Chak Kua Leng Road, it's full of cars at night. If the police wants to issue tickets, they can issue up to 1,000 every night. So the figures given to the TAC by the police really depended on time. The drivers there do not live there. Those who park their cars at Chak Kua Leng Road often live in Lam Tin and Zhao Mao Ping. They have to spend a lot of time every year, or almost an hour, to get home. If this situation persists, even if the government steps up the penalty, the illegal parking will still exist, and the problem would not go away. You are constantly developing properties, and you have no long-term plan to support the trade, including maintenance, and there's a lack of parking spaces and land, and you are trying to increase penalties.
So in the entire process, you haven't been able to address the problem. So I hope the administration and legislators can consider this. Thank you, Mr. Tang. Next one is we have the Mr. Lam Hoi Tak from the Hong Kong Container Tractor Owner Associations. Good morning, Chairman and officials. Our association's stance is we against increasing the fixed penalty across the board. I have some figures to share with you here. A month ago, in a Chinese newspaper on the issue of illegal parking, insufficient car parking spaces studies have been reported. The statistics come from the TD. They said that they give out figures on licensed vehicles. From 2014 to 16, Hong Kong registered goods vehicles 110,000. But then car parking spaces is 40,000 only. So according to the TT's figures, so there is a shortage of 70,000 car parking spaces for tourist coaches, 7,000 for over the past 3 years. Parking spaces, 5,000 or so. So we're running short of 1,000 parking spaces. But for private cars, from 2014, 490,000. 2016 is 540,000. 540,000. So in 2 years, there has been a rise of 30 to 40,000. So this goes to show which vehicles are responsible for the road congestion here. Now, as a result, goods vehicles have to park illegally because there are so many vehicles on the road, and there aren't sufficient support facilities. So I hope that in that case, the TD can consider that you would not adopt cross-board approach to curb illegal parking, and that is by increasing fixed penalty. You are putting the cart before the horse, and you're not addressing the real problem. A couple of years ago, the government told the trade that at some districts, for example, Kaichung, Qingyi, multi-story car parks for commercial vehicles will be built for, say, goods vehicles, container trucks, and even tourist coaches. But up to now, the plan is still on the drawing board. There is no real plan to implement it. So I hope that the government, if you want to increase a fixed penalty to curb illegal parking, before you do that, make sure that you put in the car park arrangement first. Next, we have the PLB General Association, Mr. Ling Chi-kang. Good morning, Chairman and members and government officials. The association is firmly against the increasing fixed penalty across the board. For GMB and RMB, we are serving the public, and we don't have enough parking spaces during evening or at night time. And even when we park at the GMB and RMB stands, we are still issued fixed penalty tickets around 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. We are parking at our GMB and RMB stands. We're not parking on the roadside. So why should penalty tickets be issued to us? Please consider that we face a problem of a shortage of drivers. One colleague has just said that we have to go to the toilet, we have to have meals, and once we go to the toilet, we are given a fixed penalty ticket costing $450. So that means we can't go to the toilet, right? So I hope that from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. the next day, as long as our vehicles don't park, they don't affect other road users, please consider not to issue us with fixed penalty tickets. That's all from me. Next, Mr. Chung Kin-fong from the DAB. Thank you, Chairman. And relation to the proposals, we have the following stance. We think that by increasing fixed penalty charges to curb illegal parking, that's only scratching the surface of problem. And the road congestion is because we have shortage of car parking spaces. There is an increase of 18% of private cars in the next 5 years, but the government has not come up with the corresponding parking policies. We believe that just by merely increasing the fixed penalty to curb illegal parking, that will not help resolve the problem. Conversely, it will trigger strong reaction from the road users. The government has been cutting down on the car park spaces to curb the growth of vehicles. That's the wrong solution. The society has changed, and we have a heavy need for vehicles in the society. Since the government has issued new licenses, it is obliged to provide the relevant parking spaces for these new vehicles. Many car parks, including the Murray Road car park, and also Yamate car park, will be closed down, and also the district open air car parks will also be shut down. But then the government has not come up with solutions to deal with the reduction in car parking spaces, only resort to increasing fixed penalty. So that's no solution at all. the parking fees will only rise. For the commercial vehicle drivers, they will be under a heavier burden as a result. Some deputations have also mentioned that, say, maybe need to take a meal or they have to go to the toilet and they are fined $450,000. That's not fair. The DAB doesn't agree with the proposal of increasing fixed penalty to curb illegal parking. I think the government should adopt a multi-pronged approach, including providing more car parks. It should be innovative, make use of IT to help out. There should be an electronic system to provide real-time information on vacant car parking spaces, so that drivers know whether they should they drive their vehicles or know exactly where to park. The Hong Kong planning standards and guidelines should also be updated to reflect the latest needs. We should tackle the problem at source. DAB hopes that the government should think carefully about the proposal and also consult the public. And it should not create too much public grievances by implementing such a proposal. Next, we have the Passenger and Goods Vehicles Drivers Association, Mr. Feng Chen-Bong. Thank you, Chairman. This proposal from the government, well, we are strongly against it. Transport has everything to do with livelihood. We depend on transport for every aspect of our life. There is loading and unloading all over Hong Kong every day. In light of insufficient loading and unloading locations, we have to illegally stop or park. And it's not that the penalty is not deterrent enough. You said the CCPI has risen by over 50% in the past 20 years, but then the transport prices have gone down instead of going up. And how we fight against inflation, we work longer hours. We work, say, 10 to 14 hours instead of 8 to 9 hours as the average worker. In the past 2 decades, there has been an increasing demand for transport of goods, whether it's a catering industry, offices, residential developments, and so on. And supermarkets, I mean, consumers can shop online and the goods are delivered to them. So before you deal with the inadequate car park problem, you just increase the fixed penalty. We are dubious about the effectiveness. The professional drivers will bear the brunt and they will get a heavier burden. Thank you, Mr. Fong. Next, we have the Container Tractor Owners Association, Mr. Wang Xiwa. Thank you, Chairman, members, administration, peers. Good morning. The Container Tractor Owners Association, we operate on tractors. The locations for loading and unloading goods are, say, within the warehouses or industrial buildings. For some old districts, the industrial building have a low ceiling, a low headroom. Then we will use some lower tractors to fit in with the lower headroom of these industrial buildings. We try to park our vehicles as much as possible into the industrial buildings themselves. Say, for example, in some old markets, they don't have parking space for our tractors, so we have to park along the roadside. So in terms of illegal parking, compared to other vehicles, our problem is less serious. So talking about the nighttime parking spaces, during holidays and during non-work hours, we are parking our vehicles in temporary car parks, and they're normally on short-term tenancy, and the Highways Department will renew the STT once every 3 to 5 years, and every time when that is done, the rental will go up. Starting from several years ago, the car parking rental was 3,000 years, and now it's at $6,000 to $7,000 per month. But then we are charging our customers the same over the years. That means our operating costs are rising and our competitiveness is being eroded. From the heyday of Hong Kong, when we were talking about our container throughput being ranking top in the world, we have fallen now to the 6th place. I think the government is prescribing the wrong medication here, so to speak. You talk about illegal parking, but in our trade, well, that's quite unavoidable in a sense. So if you are increasing the fixed penalty, that will be no solution. We still have to illegally park. We still have to go to these old markets to do our business. So you are really making things difficult for us. I'm strongly against the proposal. Next, we have Liberal Party, Mr. Fu. The Liberal Party is firmly against the proposal to increase fixed penalty. We think you are just scratching the surface of our problem. The root of the problem, as what others mentioned, is that there is a lack of sufficient parking space, especially for commercial vehicles. In the past decade or so, the number of commercial vehicles has remained the same. If illegal parking, say, stems from commercial vehicles, does it mean that in effect there has been a reduction in the number of car parking spaces? But we don't have such figures. The government has been conducting a study, but the outcome is not known yet. And many peers told us that public car parks on short-term tenancies have stopped their business progressively have been turned to other uses. And in terms of brownfield sites, the government has said that they will be used for development. How many goods vehicles and tourist coaches are being parked on brownfield sites? Does the government have the figure? How are you going to resolve the problem? Even for short STT sites in urban areas, there have been suggestions that these be used for housing and other developments. So if all these car parks are gone, what are we going to do? So this is the root of the problem that we should tackle. The trade have mentioned also about daytime parking spaces. For the car parking study, it will cover not just nighttime parking spaces. I think daytime parking spaces should also be covered under this study. You should also consider the needs of the professional drivers. Say, for example, whether they need to go to the toilets. Definitely, they need that. But never has Hong Kong or the government provided any facilities to help them or facilitate them going to the toilet or having a meal, etc. Hong Kong is an important logistics center, but we've never provided a support of that kind. So should the government also study that in your latest research? And in 2015, we have also discussed about increasing fixed penalty. And at that time, we also came here to express our views.
At that time, the LegCo requested the government not to raise penalties until the problem with parking spaces has been solved. And 1 or 2 years later, I'd like to know if the government has any preliminary results on that study on parking spaces. On the on-street parking at night for the pilot scheme, has there been any progress? Did the government request LegCo to pass that change or amendment? Thank you very much. Mr. Chen Fuchun from the Chamber of Hong Kong Logistics Industry Limited. Thank you. Good morning. I'm Chen Fuchun from the Chamber of Hong Kong Logistics Industry. We strongly object to the raising of fixed penalty by the government. Hong Kong used to be the top logistics hub, and now we are only at number 6 or 7. Does it mean that the logistics trade has been driven out? has the government tried to come up with answers? As you know, Hong Kong is a congested place, and almost 70% of our land are greens, and a majority lie in our country parks. About 40 years ago, we reclaimed land to form a container terminal. So can we do the same now? To the west of Hong Kong, can we reclaim more land so that we can relocate our logistics base in the west, and we can build a new hub? I have made this suggestion before, but some people said this is impossible. Last week, I read the news. A foundation came up with a similar proposal, and the proposal was comprehensive. One of the ideas is to move our container port westwards. Can the government consider that? Can the government reform our logistics hub? This way, we can free up a lot of agricultural land in the new territories, and the land freed up can also be used to develop housing. So I hope the government would not make things worse by raising the fixed penalty without adequate parking spaces. Next, Mr. Yip Chuk K from the Hong Kong Automobile Association. We object to the raising of fixed penalty by the government, and the reason is the government has not increased the supply of parking spaces, the road designs, etc. So raising the fixed penalty would be meaningless. And in one of the papers, THB TL1 1265, in one of the paragraphs, the government said there's no way to increase the long-term supply of parking spaces. But as our population grows, why can't the number of vehicles also grow? The government should plan this properly. For example, in private estates, there should be a parking space for each unit, and this has led to speculations. In terms of road design, we understand the situation with commercial drivers. A lot of trucks have to lodge and dislodge their goods, even though they are illegally parked, because they have no choice. Can we encourage them to do so at night instead? Or can we allow trucks to lodge and dislodge during specific hours? For the west of Hoi Ba Street in Tsuen Wan, it's a restricted zone, and in the morning there are a lot of private cars, and there's no enforcement from the police. And I'd like to know the reason. Did the police not see any illegal parking? And this has to do with metered parking spaces. Can we change the intervals of the meters to every 15 minutes? And if we make that change, then drivers would be encouraged to meter up every 15 minutes. Generally speaking, raising the fixed penalty is not the real solution, and the government has to improve the rationale of enforcement work and improve road designs. And after they made all these improvements, we are not against raising the fixed penalty. Thank you very much. So deputations have all spoken. Since we have some time left, can the government provide a preliminary response before we open up the floor to members? Thank you very much for attending this meeting, and you have offered a lot of valuable views. We will consider these at the Bureau. For example, the metering time slots at metered spaces, and we will see how we can help the trade. A lot of associations for commercial drivers or vehicles talked about the need to control the growth of private cars, and the government agrees completely. We are following up on the TAC's report on easing road congestion, including controlling the growth of private cars. And the number is growing rapidly, and the figure is at almost 4% annually. So how do we control its growth? We need the support from the public and LegCo. All measures to control the growth of private cars require legislation. I hope LegCo and the public can support this so that the government can come up with effective measures. Some deputations have reservations towards the proposal to raise fixed penalty, and the reason is that there aren't enough parking spaces. The government also agrees that the issue of parking spaces must be dealt with, especially for commercial vehicles. At the Transport Panel meeting later this month, we will submit a detailed paper describing the government's parking policy and measures we will take out to alleviate the shortage. We will have a round of detailed discussion at the Transport Panel meeting, so I won't go into detail today, but I'd like to highlight key areas of our policy. Right now, our parking policy offers priority to commercial vehicles, and I'm sure the public would support that. Commercial vehicles have to do with the livelihood of professional drivers, and they contribute to our economy. Given the limited land supply, we want to offer more parking spaces for commercial cars. Some deputations talked about on-street parking spaces at night. This is exactly one of the things the TD is considering at the moment. The TD is working with different district councils in identifying sites. The TD has identified 300 sites, and 80 of them have received support from district councils. So, of course, 300 parking spaces are not enough. So this is only one of our measures. The TD will also launch a consultancy study on commercial vehicles to look at the parking needs of commercial vehicles in different districts, including coaches or vans. Sometimes drivers need to go to the toilet at night, and some trucks also need to lodge and dislodge. So all these would be covered in a consultancy study, and recommendations would be put forth to provide more parking spaces. For private cars, as some deputations have said, private cars are for personal uses instead of for professional purposes, and we encourage the public to use public transport. However, due to different needs of the public or the place of residence, some might need to drive. So given our limited land resources, we will try to provide private car parking spaces. But our principle is that we would not encourage people who can take public transport to drive, because that would lead to further congestion. We can all see that illegal parking has led to congestion. In Castle Peak Road of Shen Shui Po, only basically only one lane is in operation because cars are illegally parked on both sides. So our enforcement action must have a deterrent effect. If there's no deterrent effect, then enforcement would not discourage violators. That's why the government is proposing raising the penalty in line with inflation in order to maintain the same deterrent effect. If illegal parking improves for professional drivers and law-abiding drivers, it can only be beneficial. Thank you very much. We'll now open up the floor for questions from members. First, Mr. Edward Lau. 5 minutes, including question and answer. Thank you. Virtually all deputations object to raising the fixed penalty. I also agree with what they said on, for example, a lack of measures from the government. They are stigmatizing the trade. And when we look at the overall policy on public transport or parking, the approach is rather fragmented. You said, does the government actually know why the number of private cars is growing so fast? I think you are a bit out of touch. The commissioner published a number of articles on newspapers, and one of them was about restoring the deterrent effect of penalties. So I have 3 points to make on this. First, you talked about ensuring adequate parking spaces before you buy a car. For the watching audience and members here, before you buy a car, did you know that the government would take away the Murray Road car park or the Middle Road car park? When I bought a car, I thought that spaces were available near my home. But in urban areas, it's nowadays very difficult to find a space. In Tsim Sha Tsui or the Middle Road car park, after the Murray Road car park is taken away, a lot of parking spaces were gone. The government has no policy to deal with this. In terms of the deterrent effect, I don't think that $320 is very cheap. I'm sure a lot of groups and drivers would find it sad to pay $320.
You said that the rate has not been adjusted since 1994. I would like to say that from 90s up to now, the salary of the professional drivers has not gone up either. So why do you think that's not deterrent enough? Because you are making a comparison here. You are looking at how much the public car parks are charging, or the car parks are charging. For private vehicles in the Fanling car park, there is a fee of $2,000. For goods vehicles, $3,000. So people would rather take the risk because of these high parking fees in car parks. If you increase the fixed penalty this time, the parking fee will go up only, and you can never be deterrent enough, because compared to the parking fees, your fixed penalty is still very affordable. So I don't think the $320 is a small amount to the professional drivers. I think you are out of touch with reality. And thirdly, I absolutely agree that there should be enhanced enforcement actions in black spots. If you do it you can repeatedly enforce the law against the same vehicle. How many enforcement law officers are there? Do you know that for the northern districts and the Taipo, how many traffic wardens are there? Let me tell you. For the entire north district, traffic warden, well, there are only 2 of them. In Taipo, only 2 traffic wardens are at work. So you can imagine, if you just increase the fixed penalty, do you have enough manpower to do law enforcement? I think the fact is that you don't have enough law enforcement officers. I think it's time to review the policy overall. I have a free parking space in the electrical complex. I don't use it because I still take the 978 bus route. I am happy to take public transport. But then the government is implementing this railway as the backbone policy, and it definitely affects the development of other transport modes. Take buses as an example. If you look at the tunnel charges, they are not consistent. So buses are forced to use one tunnel instead of another. So hence, there is congestion in this tunnel. So the government should have a better grasp of the overall transport situation in Hong Kong, come up with the comprehensive transport policies, and then talk to us whether we should increase the fixed penalty. So I hope that the government can pay heed to the one-sided views expressed here, and that is they are objecting to the increase. You have gone over time, but anyway, I'll ask Ms. Law to respond. Thank you, Mr. Lau, for your comments on how to deal with car parking spaces before you buy a car. Let me try to share experience from overseas. In Japan, Tokyo, for those who would like to buy private cars, they must give proof that within 2 km of their homes, and there is a car parking space available for them before they can buy a car. That can ensure that the new cars are always provided with car parking spaces, and there is no illegal parking. Now, for Hong Kong, like other cities, we have limited land supply or resources, but then we don't have a policy to have a ceiling on the number of private vehicles, and the legislature doesn't think that there is a need to do so either. So we are encouraging potential car owners to really consider whether there are enough car parks. Now, for commercial vehicles, the number has remained stable over the years, and the drastic increase comes really from private cars. So, potential car owners should make sure that there are enough car parking spaces around them. Maybe you say that you are not sure whether you will shop, drive your car there. But in Hong Kong, in urban areas like Tsim Sha Tsui, Mong Kok, where the districts are busy, the transport network is relatively good. So if you want to go there, maybe drivers should change their commuting patterns. And that is, if they go to districts where there is a good public transport and where there is shortage of car parking spaces, you should take public transport instead. And in relation to a deterrent effect, since 1994, for over the past 20 years, we haven't increased the fixed penalty. And because of inflation, the deterrent effect has been eroded. And in terms of the figures, the police has stepped up enforcement action, and the figures have gone up substantially. So, law enforcement will not be affected by the number of traffic wardens, because apart from traffic wardens, frontline police officers are also responsible for enforcing the law against illegal parking and issue FPTs. Mr. Edward Lau, I'm sure that you would have a response. I don't agree with what the DS said too. So let's have Mr. Ronick Chan first. Thank you, Chairman. In the last meeting, I said that I would like to see some figures from the government. paper 161702, page 3, some figures are provided, and that is in 1994, the number of vehicles and the number of FPTs issued and the ratio between the two. And in this document, it shows that in 1994, the ratio is 4.63 times. That is to say, in 1 year, for every vehicle, there will be 4.63 tickets issued. And in 2005, the figure has dropped to 1.11. And that is to say, the law enforcement actions have dropped in number. In 2016, it only increased to 2.18 only. Well, now we're talking about whether we should increase it $320 and $450. Now, without an increase in the charges, maybe, well, even without the increase, if the police can step up its enforcement action to the level as that in 1994, then there will already be an improvement. Would it be the case? Mr. Lau mentioned whether there is a problem of a lack of enforcement officers. And the administration said the police can also enforce the law. But I don't think the police has its main duties to maintain law and order, and issuing FPTs is just one of its duties, but not its main duties. So these figures show that maybe it's not that the charges or the penalty are not deterrent enough. Maybe it's because there aren't enough law enforcement officers, a lack of policemen, and also traffic wardens. So we are not enforcing the law as rigorously as we did in 1994. So by merely increasing the fixed penalty, can we, improve our road situation substantially? And also, in page 4, some figures are given, and that is the parking space to vehicle ratio. We can see that in 1994, the ratio is 1.06. In 2016, it's 1.05. February 2016 is again 1.05. So on the surface, it seems that the parking space to vehicle ratio has remained more or less the same in the past 2 decades, and that seems to show that we have enough parking spaces. But I want to say that maybe we are just talking about parking spaces in around our own housing estates. I think the problem lies not in merely the parking space, and whether we have enough road space in terms of the width and the length of the roads. Maybe we want to go to Nathan Road, Causeway Bay, and Mong Kok. All of us would like to travel to these districts. And in terms of the road length and the width of the road in these districts, have they been expanded in accordance with the growth in number of vehicles? So in terms of statistics, let's not take a look only at the parking space, but also the length of the roads in Hong Kong. Maybe we have new roads built, maybe some roads are being widened. For all these ancillary facilities, are we improving on such facilities in accordance with the growth in number of vehicles? Because many drivers would like to go to the same district, and they need more time, say, to load and unload their goods. So has the government done something to improve the road facilities? We have studied electronic road pricing schemes for a long time. For commercial vehicles, the ERP fee may form part of their operating costs. But then for other drivers, they may not use roads covered by ERP schemes. So this is one way of controlling traffic flow. Has the government studied all these options? I have other things to share. Maybe I'll save that for the next round. Maybe I can talk about that later on. Ms. Law, DS. Thank you, Mr. Chan, for your comments. In terms of the figures, in 1994, the new the FPT took effect in 1st of June 1994, so that the figures in 1994 covered the scenario before and after the fixed penalty ticket scheme was implemented. We also provided figures on 1995, and that reflected the situation after there was an increase in the fixed penalty. You see that there has been a drop in the number of FPTs because the FPTs have been deterrent enough. And 2005, the figure is very low. At that time, we saw that there is a financial crisis. In 2003, we had the SARS, and at that time, the economic activities were not that many, and we wanted to help the drivers at that time. So law enforcement actions were fewer in number. In 2016, the number of FPTs issued were 1.6 million in number. But still, the illegal parking was rampant. So that means that the FPTs were not deterrent enough. Mr. Chan asked about whether we have increased the road space. Yes, definitely, we have done so. Because there is limited land resource in Hong Kong, and because of environmental factors, it would be impossible to indefinitely increase the road length. Private vehicles have grown faster in number than the growth in road space, hence the congestion. Now, ERP, we are now conducting a study in the Central District. Phase 1 public engagement has been completed, and based on the views collected, we are now proceeding with an in-depth feasibility study as a second stage. We will be coming up with more concrete proposals in the future for the society to discuss in the future. Before we ask Mr. Edward Lau to ask a question, I would like to say something about the ratio 1.11 in 2005. The DS said that the economic condition was not very good at that time, and I would like to point out that the SARS effect was most felt in the middle of 2003, and in 2005 is not like what you described. The government was rather lenient or relaxed in law enforcement. That's not the case. I beg to differ. Mr. Edward Lau, 5 minutes. Well, I think it's right to ask people to consider car parking before buying a car.
Well, that's basically same as saying that you have to make sure you have a place to stay before you deliver a baby. Nowadays, young people could not afford properties, and sometimes they might buy a car instead. You said in Japan, if you are to buy a car, you must make sure that there's a parking space within 2 kilometers from your residence. But in Hong Kong, even if I have a space near home, I might not be able to get a space in TST. But in Japan, they have underground car parks, and they have more and more multi-story car parks. But for our parking policy, the government has refused to build car parks. And even for car parks on short-term tenancy, I think it's a waste. If you only allow parking on ground level? Why don't we build multi-story car parks like Japan? Some deputations talked about using technology, and in Japan, they are using a technology in which cars can be stacked. So is Hong Kong learning from that? Has the government looked at the situation in Japan, whether for underground parking, multi-story car park, or using electronic technology? Is the government committed to making these changes? You said it's okay to have few traffic wardens because the police would help. Sometimes I talk to the police and I realize that they are under great stress. The police has a lot of things to do. Their job is not only to issue penalty tickets. So in terms of parking spaces, can the Deputy Secretary tell us whether the government has considered solutions such as multi-story parking, underground parking, or electronic technology? Thank you very much. On parking spaces, well, Mr. Lau compared buying properties and buying vehicles. I'm sure most people would agree that having a place to stay is a necessity. But what about a private car? Is that a necessity? As some deputations suggested, private cars are only for recreational purposes, and private cars lead to pollution, and the community has to pay. When you look at our new town developments or housing supply, they often take place in the deeper parts of the new territories, and a lot of people cannot use public transport, so having a car is necessary for them. Due to a lack of housing supply, people are living in more and more remote areas, and they have to use private cars, and this is something not something you can solve from your couch. When the government develops housing sites, we have to first conduct transport impact assessment, and we have to assess the needs of the incoming residents. We will offer public transport arrangements as necessary, so Mr. Lau can rest assured of that. As for underground parking and whether the government will have similar arrangements, the answer is positive. Earlier, the Housing Department relaxed the conditions for public car park in private properties, and as soon as certain conditions are met, an exemption can be given. The construction of a public car park underground would not be counted towards the gross area, and this encourages developers to build car parks underground. And in future projects, developers would be asked to provide underground parking. For police enforcement, perhaps I would hand over to the police force. Mr. Yun. Thank you. The police's priority is on smooth traffic and safety. Our promotion focuses on education, and we would focus on serious contraventions. And in 2016, we have issued more than 1.63 million fixed penalties, and we towed 54 vehicles. Our operation will continue in all districts. The police will continue to answer needs of the public and consult district personnel in enhancing our enforcement. Thank you. Before Mr. Ronick Chan speaks, I'd like to say that a lot of people are forced to move into rural areas or new development areas. We used to place an emphasis on infrastructure, but this is no longer the case. So some people must use private cars for commutes. Mr. Chairman once could interchange in Yunlong, but it's no longer possible, so he had to drive. The government used indirect ways to control the growth of private cars. When you look at the first-time registration taxes for private cars, the tax rate is very high. And at the Competition Commission meeting yesterday, even though oil prices did not constitute a cartel, but the oil prices are still very high. Hong Kong lacks land, and that's why the parking fees are very high, whether for private cars or parking fees at shopping malls. They are all very expensive. So this force drivers could consider whether they can really afford a car. Mr. Edward Lau and the chairman cited some reasons. For example, more and more people are living in rural areas, so private cars have become a necessity. Some deputations talked about the presence of elderly people in some families, and they might want to take the elderly people out from time to time. If they take public transport or taxis, that might not be convenient, and some families also have kids, and they might have to bring a lot of supplies for their kids. That's why more and more people are driving. We cannot just look at a single reason. I think most drivers in Hong Kong have genuine needs. A lot of members of the subcommittee have suggested to the government not to make a clear-cut increase. I think the illegal entry into junction boxes for such offenses, if you feel that the current penalty is not deterring enough, you can raise the penalty. For example, illegal U-turns which lead to serious congestion. You should step up the penalties. Instead of just raising a penalty by 50%, you can have steeper increases for certain traffic black spots, which completely paralyze the traffic. For example, vehicles stopping near islands, you should tow them or further raise penalties. I think this is something people would agree. But for illegal parking due to a lack of parking spaces, for instance, for vehicles parked at 1 or 2 a.m. and yet you give them a ticket, until you come up with real solutions, can you provide some leeway? The legal advisor issued a letter to the government suggesting something rather than a clear-cut rise. you might reconsider your decision to raise the penalty across the board. Thank you very much for your suggestion. This legislative amendment involves two ordinances. One is Cap 237 on offences related to illegal parking, and the other is Cap 245 on various road conditions. For instance, stopping in box junctions, making U-turns. So these are two separate ordinances. If you support the raising of penalties under Cap 240, the idea is to restore the deterrent effect given the inflation. As for offences under Cap 237, there are more than 20 offences, and the DOJ's advice is that the current wording of the legislation does not allow us to prescribe different penalties for different offences, and we can only issue a fixed penalty. The LegCo's legal advice, well, the DOJ will offer further response soon. We are coming to the end of the first session. Before we finish, I'd like to remind the government that there are a few comments from deputations which are technical in nature, and you should think about them. First of all, the inadequate length for parking spaces. It used to be 10 meters, but now we have vehicles which are 11 meters long, and you have not adjusted the length of parking spaces. And secondly, metered spaces for commercial vehicles, strangely, they last till 12 midnight. Normally, they would last till 10 p.m. only, but why would those spaces last till 12? I find those views reasonable. And thirdly, as Mr. Ronick Chan said, and at minibus stops, tickets are issued in the deep hours, for example, 3 a.m. I hope you can be more lenient in those cases. Some deputations also asked about the progress of the study on parking spaces. In Kwai Cheng, you said you considered building a car park for commercial vehicles. What's the update? Hopefully you can give us an answer in the next session. So that's all for the first session. Let's take a 10-minute break. We will resume at 10:40. Thank you.